Hello and welcome back, future scientists. Thank you so much for making it to class today. So we're going to dive into something a little different. We're going to talk about cellular respiration, the different steps that go along with it. How do we take that glucose and turn it into ATP that our cells can use? Okay, so that's our goal for today. This can be a little complicated, so we'll just kind of introduce it today and then get into more of the complicated stuff next unit, okay? So thanks so much for being here today. We'll go ahead and get started. So what is cellular respiration? Well, this is a process that your body, your cells in your body, can take the food, mostly that glucose, and turn it into ATP, which is really the energy that your cells need. This is the equation for it at the bottom. Now, we are going to need to be able to write this equation, okay? You're usually going to need to know this. So let's kind of walk through and see what's going on here, okay? So that second bullet point, it says C6H12O6. Okay, that is the molecular formula for glucose. Here's what I want you to notice about this. Look at just the H and the O on the leftmost side, right? So H12O6. Now that is the same ratio that we see in water, right? There's always twice as many hydrogens as there are oxygen in water. It's H2O, right? So this is glucose. It's a carbohydrate. The ratio for carbohydrates are always very, very similar to water. So there's 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens here. Those together make up a glucose molecule, okay? The next thing it says plus 6O2. Now what does that mean? Okay, well O is a very important molecule that we need. It's a very important atom that we need. That's oxygen, okay? Now the reason it says O2, that is the type of oxygen that we breathe. Oxygen is very reactive. It doesn't usually stay by itself. It usually teams up with somebody. And the oxygen that we breathe, it's usually 2 oxygen atoms bound together, and that's called diatomic oxygen. Okay, so that's why it's O2, and then 6 is just telling you how many oxygens. So in this equation, there's 6 diatomic oxygens. It's just a lot of oxygen, right? Okay, and then that arrow, when it's pointing to the right, that means yields. So if we get glucose and oxygen together, we're going to do cellular respiration, and that's going to yield CO2. What is that called? What is CO2? You know the name of this gas. That's carbon dioxide, right? That's the gas that you're breathing out, okay? So it's going to yield carbon dioxide plus H2O. What is that? That's water, and then also 36 ATP. Okay, so what does all of this mean? It says glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Okay, so this is the process that your cells are doing to take glucose and turn it into energy that you need. If you look over here on the right, here's kind of a process that the steps go through. When we're breaking down glucose into ATP, this is usually how it happens. We start off with that glucose. We break the glucose down into something called pyruvate. We take that pyruvate and break it down to something called acetyl coenzyme A. That goes into something called the Krebs cycle, and then something called the electric transport system or chain. And a lot of times you'll just hear me call it the ETC, electric transport chain. So you'll see a lot of these words over there on the right today and next class as well. Okay, so cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is a metabolic process like burning fuel. Okay, it releases much of the energy in food to produce ATP, and remember that this ATP supplies cells with the energy required to perform all of life's activities. And again, just that equation down there at the bottom, this is saying glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide and water and ATP. Let's take a second and just talk about some of that real quick. So that first one says C6H12O6, that's glucose. Where's the glucose coming from? That's coming from your diet, right? Okay, where's the oxygen coming from? Well, that's coming from the air that you breathe, right? And that's yielding CO2. What do we do with that gas? We exhale it, right? So when you exhale, you're exhaling carbon dioxide, and then water and energy as well, okay? So let's talk about this. There's 2 types of respiration. So cellular respiration can occur with or without oxygen, okay? And so there's a type of respiration called aerobic respiration that requires energy, and then there's a type of respiration called anaerobic that does not require any oxygen, okay? So the difference in between these is sometimes you have oxygen to use, and you would do the aerobic, and sometimes you can't get enough oxygen to your cells, and that would be called anaerobic. So what I want you to remember, that the aerobic, the first couple letters kind of sounds like air, right? Aerobic. So to me, that's easy to remember that that's the one that requires oxygen, and then anaerobic, that prefix an means without. So without air. That is very similar to not having oxygen, okay? In humans, we actually do both of these, okay? And what I want you to know right now is that the aerobic respiration is just better, okay? You get more ATP out of aerobic than anaerobic respiration, but the benefits of anaerobic respiration is that you can do it with or without oxygen. So sometimes you don't have oxygen, or there's not an environment with oxygen. Sometimes, like imagine you're working out a lot or you're going on a long run. You're taking deeper breaths as you're working out. You'll start huffing and puffing, but your body can't keep up with how much oxygen you need. So sometimes, even though there's oxygen in the air and you're breathing it in, sometimes your body can't get it all the way to the cells as quickly as they need to. So in that situation, your cells would be doing anaerobic respiration as well. So let's kind of get into this and figure out what the difference in between these are. Okay, so cellular respiration. There are two stages of cellular respiration, okay? Cellular respiration consists of two stages. We always start with glycolysis. Glycolysis is always the first step in cellular respiration, okay? Glycolysis. This kind of sounds like a word we've been using a lot recently, right? So glycolysis, when I hear that, that kind of makes me think of glucose. Well, what are we doing to the glucose? You might remember that lysis means to split. So the first part of cellular respiration is taking a glucose molecule and splitting it apart, okay? And we're going to use that hydrolysis in order to do that, okay? So, and then once we've done the glycolysis, one of two things will happen. We'll either do the aerobic or the anaerobic respiration. The second stage can be either one, and it just depends on if there's oxygen or not. If there is oxygen, we'll do the aerobic respiration. If there is no oxygen, we'll do the anaerobic respiration. And anaerobic respiration produces a large amount of ATP. So we really want to do the aerobic respiration if we can, because we're going to get a lot more energy out of it. Okay, so let's talk about this anaerobic respiration first. Okay, so anaerobic respiration, this is what happens when there's no oxygen, okay? The first step is that we're always going to split glucose into two smaller molecules called pyruvic acid, okay? And that process is called glycolysis. Splitting glucose is called glycolysis. When you split glucose, instead of 6 carbon atoms like that are in a glucose atom, we'll split it down the middle and we'll make 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvic acid. So each of the pyruvic acid has 3 carbons, the glucose has 6 carbons. Okay, so we've just split it in half. If oxygen is available, we will do the aerobic. If there is no oxygen available, we'll do the anaerobic. Okay, so there's 2 types of anaerobic respiration. Okay, so this is what will happen if there is no oxygen. Look at that top bullet point. It's called alcoholic fermentation. This is what single-celled organisms and plants do this, okay, as well as yeast. Yeast is a good example of the alcoholic fermentation. This is how we produce alcohol, okay? So anything, wine, beer, those harder spirits, you produce all of that alcohol by this process. It's called alcoholic fermentation, okay? It's performed by bacteria and yeast cells, and humans can use this for different things. We'll make beer, we'll distill, and we'll brew with it. Okay, this is also what causes bread to rise. Okay, in animals, so that's what happens in plants and yeast and single-celled organisms. In animals, we do something else. If you don't have oxygen, you're going to do something called lactic acid fermentation, and this produces lactic acid. Okay, your human cells can perform this in their muscles without oxygen. And this is what actually, imagine you, if I had you get up right now and go run 5 miles, right? Maybe the first half mile or so you'd be feeling fine, you could kind of hang in there. But if you're like me, after mile 3 or 4, my legs are gonna be sore, I'm gonna be red in the face, I'm gonna be really huffing and puffing, and my legs are gonna be tired, right? They're gonna start feeling sore. The reason they're gonna start feeling sore is because of this lactic acid. Eventually you're going to get to the point I'm working out so much that my blood can't get the oxygen and the air to my cells fast enough. And so now, even though there's oxygen around me, my cells are in an environment where there is no oxygen. When that happens, they have to start doing this form of cellular respiration called lactic acid fermentation. We're making a little bit of energy, but we're also making this byproduct called lactic acid. The lactic acid is what makes your muscles feel tired and sore when you're working out, okay? So that's what happens if there is no oxygen. Let's talk about what happens if there is oxygen. Okay, so if there is oxygen, remember that this is called aerobic respiration. There is oxygen, okay? So what happens here is the respiration using oxygen is a 3-step process. Okay, so there's a couple more steps involved in the aerobic, but we get a lot more ATP out of it. That second bullet point tells us the advantage is that you obtain nearly 20 times more energy compared to anaerobic. So aerobic, you get a lot more energy out of it, but you have to have oxygen in order to make it happen. So the first step of aerobic respiration is always glycolysis. Glycolysis always happens first, whether there's oxygen or no oxygen. You always do glycolysis first. Something I need you to know is that glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. Okay, that's going to be important later because the next 2 steps happen in the mitochondria. So glycolysis is in the cytoplasm. We take that glucose, we split it down the middle, we make 2 pyruvic acids, okay? And this is also going to produce 2 ATP, okay? And what I mean by that is it's 2 net ATP. It takes 2 to get this process started. We get 4 out of it, so we're left with a net 2. We've gained 2 ATP total. So whether you have oxygen or not, you always do glycolysis first. So glycolysis has happened, it's in the cytoplasm. Once this happens, we'll move into the mitochondria. What happens in the mitochondria? Well, this is going to be our next step, and it's called the Krebs cycle. Something I need you to know about this is that it has 2 names. The Krebs cycle is also known as the citric acid cycle. Okay, I think we should just focus on the Krebs cycle. That's probably the name that you're going to need to know, but you might see either one. So citric acid, Krebs cycle is the same thing. So what's happening here, remember that in glycolysis we made those 2 molecules called pyruvic acids. Those are going to be important in this step. We're going to take that pyruvic acid, we're going to convert it into ATP through the Krebs cycle. There's a lot of steps here. You don't need to know all of them, but basically what you do need to know is that the Krebs cycle, it takes that pyruvic acid, it turns it into ATP, and it's going to release a little bit of carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide that you exhale is coming from this part of cellular respiration. Okay? After the Krebs cycle, the last part of cellular respiration with oxygen is known as the electric transport chain. Sometimes I'll just abbreviate this to ETC, it's just a lot shorter. What happens here is that the hydrogen ions from the pyruvic acid are transferred through the mitochondria in a chain reaction or relay race-like process. By the end of this chain reaction, 32 ATP molecules are produced. Okay, so this is where most of the ATP is coming from, is this electric transport chain. But the first 2 steps, the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, we're just doing stuff to get ready for this part. We have to make that pyruvic acid. We've got to make some other high energy, things to hold on to the energy for this process. So this is where most of the energy is coming from. You can see here 32 ATP made in the electric transport chain. And again, this is happening in the mitochondria, and that only happens if we have oxygen, okay? So here's just a breakdown. I kind of wanted to walk through those steps with you. We'll get into the nitty-gritty a little bit more. Right now, I just want us to know the different types of respiration, where they're happening, and the different names of them. So let's kind of zoom in on this picture, and I'll kind of walk y'all through this real quick. Okay, so we're starting at that yellow box over on the right. It's called cell respiration or cellular respiration. What we're going to do here is we want to take glucose and turn it into ATP for energy. So when we do that, the first step is always glycolysis. So you can see we go straight from that yellow box to our next box is called glycolysis. Notice that everything up here in the gray happens without any oxygen. So all of this in the gray is anaerobic respiration. Everything in the blue is with oxygen, and we would call this aerobic respiration. Everything in the gray up here is happening in the cytoplasm, and everything in the blue at the bottom is happening in the mitochondria. Okay, so let's pick back up at glycolysis. Okay, so at glycolysis we have two options. We can either go to that top box or the box below it. Well, the top box says anaerobic. So if there is no oxygen, we're going to go this route, and we're in the cytoplasm. So we're going to do anaerobic respiration. There's kind of two types of anaerobic respiration, and it depends on what type of organism you are. Are you bacteria and animal cells? Then you'll go up towards the top. Are you plants and yeast? Then you'll go down towards the bottom. If you're bacteria and animal cells, our end product is lactic acid. And remember, that's what makes your muscles feel sore and tired after you work out. Yeast and plants, they're going to do a type of fermentation called alcoholic fermentation, and its end product will be alcohol. Okay, so let's go down towards the bottom now. So we got glycolysis. If we have oxygen, we're going to go down into the blue rectangle at the bottom. That's called aerobic respiration, okay? The first part of aerobic respiration, we're going to move into the mitochondria. We're going to do something called the Krebs cycle. After the Krebs cycle, we're going to do the electric transport chain, remember ETC, and the end product for that is water, okay? So that's kind of just a breakdown, a little flow chart of cellular respiration and what's happening in these different processes. Okay, y'all, thank y'all so much. So here's what I want to do. Your teacher has a worksheet. It's got 10 or 15 questions on it. I'd love for y'all to take some time and work on that. Go ahead, pass those worksheets out, take some time to work on it, and when you're ready for the review, y'all can come back to me, unpause the video, and I'll go over it with y'all. So go ahead, take a couple of seconds and pass that out, and then when y'all are ready, come back to the video and we'll go over it together. All right, everybody, I know that did not give y'all any trouble at all, but just in case somebody's a little confused, let's go ahead and review this and see what everybody came up with. So thanks so much for hanging in there with me. Let's see what y'all came up with. I did just want to point out, in case y'all didn't notice, there's a word box at the bottom down here, so y'all feel free to use that as a little cheat sheet, okay? So the first one here, 1, says, what is the process by which cells transform glucose into usable energy? So what is this whole process that we've been talking about called? This is called cellular respiration, okay? Cellular respiration. Great. All right, let's keep it going. Number 2 says, respiration that occurs without oxygen is known as blank respiration. So is that aerobic, or should we put, I'm going to go with anaerobic respiration. Great. All right, number 3 says, the organelle responsible for aerobic respiration is the what? Does anyone remember what organelle is responsible for aerobic respiration? This is going to be the mitochondria. Great, let's keep it going. All right, so 4, glycolysis occurs in the blank. So the aerobic parts happen in the mitochondria. The anaerobic parts happen somewhere else in the cell. Where does that happen? That happens in the cytoplasm. So let's go with cytoplasm here. Great job. Okay, let's keep it going. 5, the chemical equation for cellular respiration is blank plus blank yields water, carbon dioxide, and ATP. So if you need energy, where's that energy coming from? What are you kind of consuming all day? Well, we need food, and the type of food that we really focus on with energy is sugar or glucose, okay? What's something else you're bringing into your body all day? Taking a deep breath, that's going to be oxygen, right? So your body can take glucose and oxygen and make water, carbon dioxide, and ATP. That's what cellular respiration tells us. All right, number 6. The purpose of cellular respiration is to generate blank, the energy currency of the cell. So what are we trying to make through cellular respiration? That's called ATP. And remember, that stands for adenosine triphosphate. Okay, let's keep it going. Number 7, during glycolysis, blank molecules of ATP are consumed and blank molecules of ATP are produced. Okay, I think I just mentioned it briefly there for a second. So glycolysis, we gotta spend some ATP to make ATP. It's kind of like you might have heard, you gotta spend money to make money. It's kind of like that. So we use 2 molecules of ATP, but we produce 4. And so what we would say is it's a net 2. I'll just write here over to the side so you know. A net 2. You might have heard someone say net when we're putting 2 in, we're getting 4 out, so overall we have a net 2 gain. Okay? So let's look at 8. During glycolysis, a molecule of glucose is split into 2 molecules of what? Well, these are those little molecules that I've been talking about called pyruvic acids, okay? Okay, so pyruvic acid. So you take glucose, you split it down the middle, you make 2 pyruvic acids. Okay, let's do 9 and then I'll erase everything and do the ones at the bottom there. Okay, 9. In all 3 stages of aerobic respiration, up to blank molecules of ATP can be generated from a single molecule of glucose. This is going to be 38. Okay, 38 total are made. Okay. So that's how many we're making through this whole process. Okay, great job. So make sure you get these. I'm going to scroll down here in just a second and do those last 5 with you, okay? All right, let's knock this out, just a couple left. All right, so 10. During blank, yeast produce alcohol. So out of these words, which of these words mean when the yeast is making alcohol? That's called fermentation. Great. All right, let's go to 11. The reason your muscles may feel sore after working out is due to the buildup of what? So when you don't have oxygen, your body starts to do lactic acid fermentation. That's going to leave your muscles feeling sore because you have all this lactic acid built up. So lactic acid. Great. Let's keep it going. So 12, what is the first stage of cellular respiration? We always start off with glycolysis. Glycolysis is always our starting point. So glycolysis for 12, let's keep it going. 13, what is the second stage of cellular respiration? That's known as the Krebs cycle. And sometimes you'll see this labeled as the citric acid cycle as well. All right, 14, blank is the third stage of cellular respiration. That is the ETC, okay, electric transport chain. And then last one here, most of the ATP is generated in stage 3. That ETC is where most of the energy gets made. So y'all, thank you so much for following along. This stuff can be tricky, so I wanted to make sure we reviewed that a little bit together. Your teacher has some other work for you to practice on, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.